Stander is a 2003 South African biographical film directed by Bronwen Hughes about Captain André Stander, a South African police officer turned bank robber, starring Thomas Jane, who initially turned down the role, but then later took it. The filmmakers were able to talk to Alan Hale, one of Stander's accomplices, who was also still imprisoned, Cor van Deventer, his police partner, and the warden of the prison where André was incarcerated. The film was made on a $15 million budget and grossed only $296,000 at the box office. The real André Stander was born on the 22nd of November 1946 and died on the 13th of February 1984. He was a South African criminal and policeman and one of the most infamous bank robbers in South Africa's history. Stander was notorious for his audacious manner with which he carried out his crimes. He sometimes carried out the crime during his lunch break, often returning to the scene as an investigating officer. André was the son of prominent figure in South African prison service, Major General Francois Jacob Stander. André was under pressure from an early age to pursue a career in law enforcement. He enrolled in the South African Police Training College near Pretoria in 1963, graduating at the top of his class. Shortly afterwards, he joined the Kempton Park Criminal Investigation Department. In 1977, Stander flew to Durban and robbed his first bank. Between 1977 and 1980, he is believed to have stolen nearly 100,000 rand, which in today's terms would be 2.9 million rand, or around $170,000. After robbing nearly 30 banks, Stander was arrested and sentenced to 75 years in prison on the 6th of May 1980. However, since many of the charges in the sentence ran concurrently, he faced an actual sentence of 17 years. Stander met Alan Hale and Lee McCaw at Zonderwater maximum security prison. After his first trial, Stander claimed that his disillusionment with the police service stemmed from a prior incident where he and his fellow officers shot and killed 176 unarmed school children during the 1976 Soweto uprising. However, Stander was not present with the police contingent at Tembisa when the shooting of an unarmed school children took place. Other accounts have suggested that Stander, who completed his national service in Angola during the South African border war, may have also been bored with civilian life and craved the excitement afforded by a life of crime. On the 11th of August 1983, Stander and McCaw, along with 5 other inmates, were taken from the prison's premises for a physiotherapy appointment. Once the prisoners were left alone with the physiotherapist, Stander and McCaw overpowered her and escaped. The other prisoners refused to participate and stayed behind. Stander and McCaw returned to Zonderwater on the 31st of October 1983 in order to spring Alan Hale from the facility where he was taking a trade test. From that day until the end of January 1984, the three began robbing banks together, under the nom de guerre of the Stander Gang, a term coined by the news media. McCaw was killed on January 30th, 1984, in a police raid on the gang's hideout in the Houghton estate in Gauteng. Hale fled to Greece, then England, then Spain, and eventually back to England, where he was caught, tried, and sentenced to 9 years of prison for robbery and related firearms charges. After serving his time in the UK, he was extradited back to South Africa, where he was sentenced to a further 33 years in prison. Hale was released on parole on the 18th of May, 2005. While police were closing in on McCaw in South Africa, Stander had been in Fort Lauderdale, Florida, trying to arrange the sale of the gang's recently purchased sailing yacht, the Lily Rose, as they planned to use it for their final getaway once they had acquired enough money. While Stander remained in the United States, international arrest warrants and all-point bulletins were issued for his arrest. Trying to make the best of the situation, Stander created a false identity of an Australian named Peter Harris and forged his driver's license. Afterwards, he visited a used car lot and purchased a Ford Mustang from a dealer named Anthony Tomilasso. On the 10th of February 1984, police pulled over Stander while he was driving and arrested him for driving an unregistered vehicle. Being relatively unknown to the American authorities at the time, Stander presented his false ID to the police, who recognized it as a forgery and subsequently seized it, adding a driver's license forgery to his list of offences, but believed his story about his identity and released him. Once released on the same evening, Stander returned to the police impound lot where his seized Mustang was being kept, broken, and stole the car. On the following morning, Stander returned on the same used car lot where he had purchased the vehicle and asked the same dealer, Tomasello, to have the car repainted in a different colour. However, Tomasello had read about the Stander gang in a local newspaper. He told Stander that he would help him. He got his information, and as soon as Stander had left, Tomasello called his lawyer. On his lawyer's advice, Tomasello called the local police. Based on Tomasello's information, a police tactical unit surrounded the apartment that Stander had been using as a hideout, but Stander was not there. He had acquired a bicycle to use while his car was with Tomasello and being repainted. He had left the apartment on a bicycle and returned only after the police had surrounded it. As he unknowingly rode up to the apartment complex, Officer Michael van Stettina, who had been posted on the perimeter, recognized Stander and attempted to stop him. Stander tried to get away, but Stettina prevented his escape. A struggle for the officer's shotgun began. The gun discharged and Stander was hit. He fell onto the apartment complex driveway, bleeding profusely. Stetina immediately radioed for an ambulance. Although Officer Stetina tried to administer first aid, Stander's wounds were too extensive and he bled to death before an ambulance arrived. The cast includes Thomas Jane as André Stander, Deborah Cara Unger as Becky Stander, André's wife, Ashley Taylor as Captain Cor van Deventer, David O'Hara as Alan Hale, Dexter Fletcher as Lee McCall, and Marius Veyers as General Francis Jacobus Stander. Some interesting trivia notes. The town of Tembisa was enthusiastic about filming the apartheid rally scene. 1,300 extras were recruited for the riot scene, and many additional locals joined in on the day, rushing in while the cameras were rolling. In a DVD commentary, director Bronwen Hughes points out that although the Toi Toi presented in the film was an authentic chant, the AK-47 Toi Toi chant is a later incarnation of the chant, much more aggressive than one that would have been used in the mid-1970s when the actual riot scene takes place. Now, this is an interesting film to review. On one hand, you have a film that is actually not bad, well-paced, an interesting story about a fascinating man, and the acting is quite good, and Thomas Jane really does dive into the role the best he can. On the other hand, though, you have a very historically inaccurate film, with poor editing at times, strange direction, and frankly South African accents that are really so poor. So let's start with the acting. Thomas Jane is a very competent actor, and I really feel he took on the role of André Stander very seriously and really wanted to do the role justice. The problem is, though, his South African accent is so far from good. He kind of mumbles his way through the performance. You can't really hear him at times, and I don't really know what he was trying to do. And I really cannot say much about David O'Hara's accent as Alan Hale, nor Dexter Fletcher as Lee McCall. Both their accents are just so hammy and so unbelievable. I don't know what they are trying to sound like. Especially when you compare it now firstly to Ashley Taylor, who plays Captain Cor van Deventer, a true South African actor, who of course is not putting on an accent. I just don't understand why in these types of films they don't just cast South African actors to play these roles more authentically. Yes, I know they want to get a big name actor to maybe get the funding for the film, but it just would feel so much more realistic and a better portrayed film if you actually had somebody that could speak like a South African would. In saying that, though, I don't feel Thomas Jane or the other actors act poorly. It's just, unfortunately, it's so hard to look past their hammy accents. André Stander was a very, very complicated man, and he was living in a very complicated time within South Africa. For me, there are parts of the film that sort of capture the essence of apartheid in a true and honest way. But there also are so many historical inaccuracies here. Just little things like Stander watching on a flat-screen TV, or using a camera that was clearly made in 2001, or using a gun that would only be produced 4 years later. But those are little minor things, really. For me, though, when you look at it, for example, the way he dies in the film, where he's shot by policemen who pull him over for running a red light, is completely different to what really happened in real life. Or even the scene where Stander now returns to Tembisa to make his final peace with the father of the protester he killed, and now gets beaten up by the boy's father. Well, I just found it a bit corny, frankly, and very unbelievable. Look, whether Stander was really disillusioned with the police force and dismayed at holding up the corrupt morals of the South African government of the time, one will never know. I feel almost Bronwen Hughes included this into the story to make Stander more of a hero per se, that almost he was a Robin Hood, robbing from the rich and giving back to the poor. But that's not really the true story. Stander was a criminal. Yes, it makes for a fascinating story, and he was a fascinating man. And listening to Alan Hale now describe the stories of the Stander gang is absolutely captivating. But at the end of the day, Stander, Hale, and McCall were criminals. They were bank robbers. And they stole a lot of money and tried to get away with it. And in the end, like the old saying goes, you live by the sword, you die by the sword. This is a film that could have really been so much more. With the right cast, the right director, and telling the story true to its tale, I think you could have had a superb film. Instead, though, you have a film that is somewhat of a mess, that has lots of potential, isn't badly made, but in some ways is just kind of lazy, and never really reaches its full capability of what could have been an excellent film. Stander's life is truly a fascinating story, but I feel this film misses the mark. It's over-glamorized, historically inaccurate, with some poor cast choices. And you know it's a film if it had been done with just a touch more respect. Could have been an excellent film. Instead, it falls tragically short. Stander gets a 6 out of 10.